Hey there, it's Emily Ronnow with Pet Dog USA, and we are just kicking off our new Ask Emily video series. And here at the beginning, I wanted to do a couple of videos really quick on some theory underpinnings that I refer to all the time in my private training situations. So the first one I did was on classical conditioning, which was the work of Pavlov. And if you haven't seen that already, you can check it out by clicking the link here on the page. This video is going to be on the work of B.F. Skinner and his work with operant conditioning, which is really how behaviors are motivated in mammals. And we're going to talk about how that's relevant to you and your pet pup at home. So when working with dogs, it's really helpful to keep in mind the work of B.F. Skinner and his theory of operant conditioning. In operant conditioning, Skinner described, he's 4 words that I'll define really quickly. He talked about positive and negative, reinforcers, and punishers. So first of all, let's talk about positive and negative. Unlike what many of us think sometimes, positive and negative are not value laden. They don't mean good or bad or even better or worse. They're simply math equations. So what he meant by positive is addition and negative is subtraction. That's it. The things that we are either adding to or taking away from the equation that make behaviors more likely or less likely to occur again. Now, reinforcers, the word reinforcer means that something is being reinforced. In short, it means that it's going to start happening with more frequency or more intensity. If something, whether I think I'm reinforcing it or not, if something is starting to happen with more frequency or more intensity, that behavior for that mammal is being reinforced somewhere, somehow in that equation. A punisher is the opposite. A punisher is something that makes a behavior less likely to occur again. And again, if something starts happening with less frequency or less intensity, something about that equation is technically punishing. And I really encourage people to take the value laden off of some of these words when we use them and think of them from more a mathematical, if you will, kind of state of mind. So the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning are a positive reinforcer, which means we're adding something to the equation that makes the behavior more likely to occur again. And that's an example of a reward. So this is the first of 4 quadrants. A lot of us are very, very familiar with it. It's also the foundation of, if you hear people talking about reward-based training or positive reinforcement training, they're referring to this quadrant of Skinner's operant conditioning model, whether they realize it or not. So positive reinforcer is technically and literally things that we add to an equation that make a behavior more likely to occur again. That means that I do a behavior and it makes good things happen. And so therefore, I am more willing to do that behavior again. The next quadrant is a negative reinforcer. Now, a negative reinforcer means that there's something in my environment that I don't like. I'd like to make it go away or turn it off. And I'm going to start volunteering behaviors to do that. So the way a negative reinforcer works is that through my behavior, I find something that works to make this go away. In pet dog training, there's several places that we use it in obedience, and I often use it when I'm working with dogs into proofing obedience into high distractions or working with dogs that are potentially reactive or dangerous so that we have good control on them. But in pet dog training, there's a huge segment. I spent a lot of time in this quadrant when we're talking about kids and dogs, and oftentimes this is how dogs, for example, learn to bite hands. Even little dogs, very innocently, if we go to put the leash on them, they say, I'm not so hot about you putting the leash on me right now. They turn around and they volunteer different behaviors, one of which might be nailing me in the finger. And if I say, ouch, and I drop the leash and I drop the dog, then the dog's gonna say, sweet, that worked, awesome, I'll just do that next time. And that's an example of how a negative reinforcer works. The dog offered a bite, because it was wanting to turn off this event of being put on leash. It worked, and so therefore that behavior goes to the top of the list that dog's going to volunteer next time it finds itself in a similar situation. Now the next quadrant is a positive punisher. Now, a positive punisher means that we're adding something to the equation that makes behavior less likely to occur again. In more detail, bad things happen. I touch a hot stove, I get burned, I experience pain. we're adding pain to the equation, and therefore most of us are less likely to touch the hot stove again. I stick my nose in a rattlesnake, I get bit, I'm less likely potentially to stick my nose in a rattlesnake again. And there's lots of situations in life where it doesn't necessarily have to be painful, it just doesn't really work out. So when I'm working with my private training clients, one of my favorite stories or analogies when I'm talking about a positive punisher and helping us understand that it's not necessarily a catastrophic event, or we're not talking about beating dogs or being even painful things to a dog. If you think of the analogy of the example of a casino floor and slot machines, most of us, depending on where we fall in this continuum of human behavior, are going to have different levels of motivation. I might be really motivated to sit there for hours and hours and hours and days and lifetimes pulling the handle on that slot machine, and then there's others of us that losing the quarter is almost adverse enough that I'm not motivated to put another quarter in. But depending on where we are in that continuum, if we take someone in the middle, if we hung, for example, a bucket of water balloons over every slot machine, and for maybe the same odds that you had of winning something, you had the same odds of having a water balloon dumped on your head, I would argue that we would see probably a significant fallout in behavior. We would see fewer people willing to sit at those slot machines. So maybe I would sit there less time, or maybe that would be enough of, no, I'm just going to stand back and laugh at whoever else gets the water balloon dumped on their head. And I like that analogy because it reminds us that a water balloon's not painful, it's not traumatizing, it might be startling, slightly inconvenient, we have to go upstairs and change, but it's enough of an adverse event, we've added something to the equation that makes the behavior less likely to occur again, depending on the motivation of that mammal for whatever it is that they're going for. So that's an example of how positive punishers work, and you might hear me refer back to this as we go through some of these questions in the Ask Emily series. So the last quadrant is what we call a negative punisher. And what that basically is withholding. We're taking something away from the equation that makes the behavior less likely to occur again. It's pretty oftentimes positive reinforcement and negative punisher go hand in hand. We're using a combination of the two, almost like a clutch on a vehicle. So it's really through a process of combining these two that we shape behavior with food. I have the food in my hand, and the dog's volunteering all sorts of behavior to try to get the food, and it's not working, and it's not working, and it's not working, and so they finally move on to a new behavior. So maybe I start with the dog, and I'm holding the food, and they're barking at me, and I just let the barking not work. The barking doesn't get them the food. And so therefore they move on to something else. Technically that's a negative punisher. I withheld the food and they chose to try a different behavior to get whatever it is that they wanted. So it was a really quick overview. If you're interested in learning more about operant conditioning, you can certainly Google it. You can find lots of references on it out there. There are some great books. If you want to reach out to me, I can even give you some more specific references. But I wanted to cover at least that much so that we have a good foundation, and some of these things you'll hear me talk about as we go through these questions inevitably. So I hope it was entertaining and educational, and until next time, keep those tails a wagging.